All right, folks, we're going to be working on Unit 6. We've already gone through the Chapter 7 stuff, so now we're going to focus our attention on Chapter 8. This is a fairly short chapter, should go somewhat quickly compared to some of the others. And we got basically a couple of different topics here. The main one is working with a pretty important HTML structure called tables. And then how to style those tables, and what kind of use they have and why we still have these. And then we'll also look at some slightly more advanced CSS stuff, which is this concept of pseudoclasses. All right, so that's kind of the grand scheme here. And so I'm going to go ahead and get that PowerPoint up on the screen here so we can start going through it. Here are the objectives for the chapter per the author. And let's just start talking about what an HTML table is. And this is kind of a bizarre thing to think about, but we put stuff on the screen. We tend to think about screen content in just a few different little categories, actually, when you start to really break it down and analyze it. Generally speaking, we're putting stuff on a screen. It's usually either words, images, or videos, right? A little bit of content and style and stuff. But when we're putting information on the screen, most notably words, sometimes those words can actually delve into like the numeric or organizational areas, or where the content does not necessarily make sense to just kind of be plain words on a page. We start to like organize it. So like you can think of like the difference between creating a document and creating a spreadsheet. And really, when we talk about tables in HTML, we're really trying to mimic the functionality and look, and strike the functionality part, the look really is really what we're doing here, of working with a spreadsheet, where things can very easily be put into rows and columns and organized and made to look orderly, is really kind of a good way to say it. Now, why do we call this, you'll see this word thrown around, we call it tabular data, tabular information. And that's because when we do actually use spreadsheets, so I'm going to bring up Excel right now just real quickly. And I'll just bring up, this is an exercise from one of our data science courses, by the way. We're looking at, let's say, information here. And you notice how everything is arranged into rows and columns. And so everything like in one column is related. These are all the items that are being sold. These are the categories of the food, the price, the profit, and the calories, right? It's pretty self-explanatory. So this one entry for pizza, well, it's hot food. It's cost $2. We make 50 cents profit, and it's got 480 calories. And why do we call it tabular? Well, one of the ways that you can move around the spreadsheet is you can use your arrow keys. So I'm using my arrow keys right now. But you can also use your tab key. And so for whatever reason, they call it tabular data. That's one of the reasons. But we're trying to mimic sort of what a spreadsheet does, or at least layout-wise, appearance-wise. And so that's why we'll call that. So typically we have rows and columns, like it says, similar to a spreadsheet. And we kind of set this up by using really a few basic tags. And the three basic tags are the ones that you see listed here. And that would be table, TR, and TD, which stand for, well, table stands for a table, and TR stands for a table row, and TD stands for table data, technically. Right. So here's a little breakdown of some of the code elements. Okay, so the table tag itself holds the entire table. The TR contains the table row, so one row across, and a TD is one individual spot in the table. So you notice they don't have like row and column, they have a row, and then the data is part of that row. And then we also have some auxiliary tags, and there's a number of them, but the first one that they're demonstrating here is a caption. And so what they're doing is they're adding a little bit of code, and then those are words that sit by the table and describe the table. Pretty self-explanatory, really. Now, interestingly, they have an example of some code that builds a table. It stretches over 2 pages, And I want you to notice the anatomy of this is really kind of a good way to start. So the first thing that we do is we look at the table tag itself, and you'll notice it stretches over 2 pages. So its table tag starts up here and finishes down here. So we open and close the table tag. The caption, if we have one, sits at the top, or you know what, it could go at the bottom too. Nobody says it has to be at the top. It's either the top or the bottom, most typically. And notice the tag for that is caption. From there, we go into this like weird pattern of where we define the rows. We have an opening row tag and then a closing row tag. Inside there, there's 2 table data cells. And then as we scroll down the page, what we'll notice is the next table row also has 2 table data cells. So one here, and one on the next page, and then another row with 2 table data cells. And so what we end up with is one row, table data, you know, etc. Right? But each row is defined, the table data is put inside, another row is defined, table data is put inside, another row is defined, table data is put inside. So that's like the general anatomy of the table. So the next example, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you these examples first, and then we'll build the code because it's not really too hard. Here's another example of the same structure, but this time the attempt is that, you know, those top 2 fields really are kind of the column headers, right? And it would be appropriate for them to look different. And so what they do is they actually have a separate tag for the headers called TH, table headers, and name and birthday will go in those. All the rest of the information will just kind of stay as it is. Oops, sorry about that. But when it's all said and done, the table header ends up becoming a little bit more bold and prominent, so that it can be differentiated from the rest of the table data. So let's go ahead and try to build a little bit of this, and you'll see in the doing how this works out. Now, so here's the helpful tip, right? So as we're kind of building this code, if you follow along with me, you will in essence be completing one of the assignments for this unit. So, and that would be the Improve Your Site assignment that includes a table. You can notice right there that's one of the things that you want to do. So we want to take your personal site that you're working on from the Unit 5 site building, and we're going to add a page with a table and make the site look better. So for some people, you might have a spot on your web page where you're like, yeah, this is perfect because I can add the list of all my video games here in a table. It will work perfect on this page. For other people, it'll be like, I don't see anywhere to put this on my website. So in that case, you might want to actually have a separate page where you have code samples, or maybe just create a table page or something like that just to demonstrate the table. A table will be required for your final project. So where and how you add it is up to you, but this is basically what we're working on here, is that assignment. So I'm going to go to my, and I'm trying to think of like, where's a good spot to put this? And maybe the Dragon page is actually a good one, because there's not a lot on here right now. And so what I'll do is I have this like goofy whatever box, and maybe like right below that box and above this text is a great place for a table. All right, so I'm going to go to my HTML file here. So I'm just going to look at the code, and I want to identify that spot where I want this to go. And I think what I figured out is I want it to go in between these 2 things. I'm just going to create a little extra space just so it's easy to see this. Now, generally speaking, this is the structure for a table. All right, so I'm just going to create the framework first, and then I'm going to show you something really cool about better HTML editors. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add the table tag. Dreamweaver helps me close it right away. So there's an opening and closing table tag. Now I'm going to indent, and then normally what we do is we do a TR tag, open and close. I create a little space in between it again. And then inside there, I'm going to create some table data. That would be 1 cell. And let's create one more cell. So there's 2 cells. one row with 2 cells in it. If I wanted to add a third cell, I could do that. In fact, let's just do that. Let's make ours will have 3 columns instead of 2. All right, so there's an empty table with 1 row and 3 cells. Now, if I want to create row after row of 3 cells across, I can actually just take this structure, copy it, and paste it back in, right? And I can do that, a couple of times. So now I have an empty table with 3 columns and 3 rows. And let's just try to think of like what would be a good thing here. I often do like football teams or something, but maybe we can think of something a little bit better. Let's do TV shows. TV show. Genre. Maybe the network it's on. I'm speculating here pretty heavily. And then we can come up with some information to go inside here. So for example, maybe the first TV show is House of the Dragon, which is my theme, right? I don't know what genre you would call that. Fantasy maybe, or science fiction even. Let's call it fantasy. Or maybe like a fantasy drama. You can correct me on that if you wish. And the network is HBO, right? Another show, here, Breaking Bad. I would call that a crime drama, maybe even a dark comedy, honestly, when I think about it, because it's kind of funny at times. And then the network is AMC TV. That's the network. All right, so there's my table in rough form. And folks, here's what I don't normally do this in this class, but just to save you guys a little bit of typing, here's the code I just typed in the chat. So you can copy that and drop it right into your own editor if you wish. Right. I'm going to go ahead and save this. Control S to save. Make sure I'm back in my editor here. And then I'm going to take a live look at the code. And you know what? There it is. Not the prettiest thing in the world, mind you, right? It's not the most beautiful thing. But we have the information and it's kind of organized, right? Kind of. One thing that the author did pretty quickly, right, is they switched that first row so that these are all THs. So if you want to do that, you can do that. So make these all headers. And functionally, mostly what this does is it gives it a different designation. So we know it's a header, not data, just the header. And it also styles it a little bit differently. So in the live view, now you can see it centered it and it made it bold, right? And you can see that it's got that look to it. And it's a little better, right? The other thing that the author does and recommends this, and this is not really the way that you should put a border on a table anymore, and I say anymore because in the old days it was the only way we could do it, but you can add an attribute that says border 1, which creates a 1 pixel border around everything, so you can kind of see the parameters of it, so you can kind of see where it sits on the page, basically, right? I'm not always a fan of borders on a table, but maybe you like this. Maybe like you look at this and you go, yeah, it looks great. I don't think so. I think it looks a little rough and amateurish, but it does create delineations. You can tell where the columns are and you can tell where the rows are, and that's actually the point of doing that code. So like one of the design tips to working for a table is add borders to the table temporarily so you can see where everything sits, and then you can get rid of it later, right, once you have it styled or figured out. Right, so this is one way to do a table pretty quickly. If I wanted to add a caption, I could do that too. So here's an example of the caption being added, and I'll say list of TV shows. All right, saving that and take a look, and there's the caption up at the top. If I wanted, I could also move that to the bottom, then the caption is underneath. Your choice. Doesn't matter which of those two that you use. What's kind of interesting here is if you use a higher end editor and Dreamweaver happens to be one of those. That we actually have some tools built in, and so most of the better tools, like most of the ones I think I demonstrated today earlier, would have this feature where they have like an insert menu, and then a table is just a selection. So watch what happens when I do this. It brings up the table creation tool, and it says, well, how many rows do you want? How many columns do you want? How wide do you want the table? What's your border thickness? And then a couple other settings, including cell spacing and padding. And then if you want a header, where it appears on none, on the left, on the top, or both, right? And so I'll choose, let's say, 5 columns or 5 rows with 4 columns. Let's make the table 600 pixels wide, a border thickness of 1. I won't worry about the cell spacing and padding right now too much, but if you want, those are, I think, good to add both of those, maybe 5 pixels of each. And then I'm going to have column headers at the top. I can include my caption, hey, whatever, this is a table, and then I'm going to say okay. And then I want you to watch what a better quality tool does, is it creates the whole thing for me. Now you'll notice, right, okay, well, indented it weird, whatever, right, we can fix that, but it added the caption, it created table body tag, which I'm not sure where that came from, but here's my TH, here's my TRs with my TDs, and all the TDs are empty because, but they are filled with the space, right? So NBSP is a space, just to put something inside of the table. But then what you would do is you would come in here and you would replace it with, I don't know, Gilligan's Island, for example. Right. So if I want to take a look at this now, I want you to notice how quickly it created the structure for me, and did a pretty nice job of it pretty quickly and pretty automatically. So a lot of the higher end tools will have the ability to add code like this dynamically. Like you're adding a certain type of structure, it's got it in a drop down, you just select it, make your settings, and boom, all the code is there. All you're left to do really is to enter the content, right? I want you to notice though that they are adding one additional tag, and this is where I go back to the PowerPoint, and that's coming up, but they have a bunch of different ways that you can style the tables and make them look better. We already played a little bit with cell padding and spacing, so if you look at the code here, it drops in, a border, cell padding, cell spacing, and a width, and all of these being included here as attributes in the table tag work, and it will always work. But what you will discover is if you take this over to the W3 validator, they're going to tell you these tags are obsolete and you should use CSS instead. And you can do that. You can move all this stuff into CSS. And that's what these next 2 pages are about, about the attributes that people have learned to add to tables. You see a bunch of them are considered obsolete, right? So you're best off not including that straight into your HTML. Same is true. I don't know if this is a duplicate. It looks like a duplicate slide, right? Oh, no, a couple different things. Column span and row span still work. But all these different things here are what we consider either obsolete or deprecated, ultimately. Now, the interesting thing is if you do start working with a table, and this I'm not going to demonstrate, but I'm just showing it to you, by the way, is sometimes when you have rows and columns, sometimes you might have a header at the top that you want to span 2 columns, and they have this special thing called column span that spans 2 columns, so you only list 1 column, and then it comes out like this. That's a column span attribute. There's also the row span, so if you want a box to take up 2 rows worth of space, you eliminate one of the TDs where that happens, but then you also add the row span tag to say that, hey, this is going to occupy 2 rows of the table. So column span occupies 2 columns, row span occupies 2 rows. Can you increase that number? Yeah, you can increase it to cover a whole bunch of stuff if you wish. So it can go up to as many columns or rows as you have in the table. The usefulness of that is relative to what stuff you're putting on the screen. The information will dictate how you combine rows and columns. All right. They do throw in this little thing about accessibility here, and I think this is kind of interesting. They do want you to use the TH tag to indicate row and column headings, because your search engines and other like content navigators will identify those as important, meaning this is a column header, this is important, so it's considered important to add. Another thing that they do suggest is that captions are really useful. Like, what is this table about? So if you're not including a caption, then you'll have to have some separate HTML indicating outside of the structure what the table is. The thought of the caption is that it's part of the table and part of the definition of the table. So really a good idea to add it. It's in terms of SEO or search engine optimization, it's usually better to put it at the top, generally speaking. All right. The next part that we're going to do is we're going to actually start to play with some of the stuff here and make the table look a little nicer. And we're going to do this in CSS. So what they're doing in this table is they're basically showing, like, if you're doing an alignment on a table, these are the CSS properties that you would use to align it. If you're doing a background color, in the old days we'd say BG color on the table itself. Don't do that anymore. Now we do it just regular background color. If we want to add padding to cells or spacing to cells, we use either padding or border spacing or border collapse. And then you can declare height, vertical alignment, width, border, and all the border stylings, and even background images on a table using standard CSS. Okay, so that I think is pretty interesting. Let's play with that just a little bit so you get kind of a feel for how that works. Because frankly, the stuff I've created here is pretty darn ugly. It's not very pretty to look at. One thing I will do is, because these tables here kind of sit right next to each other, I am going to put a series of line breaks in here just to kind of move them apart just a little bit, just so you can see, right? So just a little space in between them. Yes, I can do that with margins, padding, all that kind of stuff too. But this is just a little more quick and practical is how I'm thinking of it. All right, let's play a little bit with that top table. Right, and where is my Dreamweaver? There it is. Go back to the code view on this, and maybe what would be helpful here is maybe we add another TV show or two. Right, so I'm just gonna copy these structures. I'm gonna clean up my code, and let's put in. Somebody give me a TV show. What's a TV show I can add here? Kind of drawing blanks. Anybody have a favorite? All right, don't all answer at once. All right, how about something simple like Saturday Night Live? I'm going to call it live comedy. And really, it's live sketch comedy, right? And then what network is that on? That's on NBC. How about another show? What's a good show to put here?
2.5 Men.
Not familiar with it. Comedy?
Yeah, it's 2.5 Men with Charlie Sheen. It's pretty funny.
What network is that one on?
It's on. I mostly see it on cable. I think it was on like NBC too.
All right, we'll do NBC. Taking your word on it, right? So the only reason I'm doing that, by the way, is just to have a little more to work with. All right, so let's do a couple of things. First, I'm going to notice that first row, that's like column headers. That might not be a bad thing to give it a different background color for the header. So let's start there. So in my style sheet here, I'm going to try to do a combo view. right? So we can see it as it happens. I'm just going to go way down to the bottom, and the column tags are TH. So if I say TH, I can say background color, and let's pick a color. Let's I'm going to scroll down a little bit to find one. Light sky blue. All right, so there's your background. You can see it already. There you go. All right. Another thing that I can do is, for the whole table, I might decide, this like cell spacing and cell padding stuff. Maybe I can do a padding. Let's try to see what padding does here. Let's do 20 pixels. What does that do to my table? All right, so what it did, I don't know if you guys are really catching that, is it put padding on the outside edge of the table to the inside. Maybe that's good. I'm not sure that it is. So I'm going to get rid of that. Not really too good. All right. Would it be better if I put the table or the padding on the table data cells? Let's try that. So here I'll go padding, and maybe 20 is too much. Maybe like 10 pixels might be good. Now you see what that did is I gave it a little bit of space, right? In fact, I'm going to say that that would also look good on the top row. So I can do TD, comma, TH, so it applies to both. I think that looks much better, because it's a little bit of space. And you know what? Maybe now I can go back to my regular HTML and get rid of the border equals 1. So the borders are gone. I don't know if you like this look or not. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. But I think that's a little bit better, personally. Right? If for some reason I did want to add the border in, I can do it through CSS. So I can just say border, and then use all your standard border commands. So if you want it to be a solid line, 3 pixels wide, and red, I can do that. But notice, that's on the outside of the table. Red, maybe not the best color. Maybe we can change that. Let's what color could we do here? Let's do RGB. So, and the reason I'm doing that is I wanted to do color picking for me. Let's go for something a little softer. Actually, maybe darker is better. Let's just go with that. Okay, so there's a dark colored border. That's on the outside of the table. All right, whether you like that or not, that's highly subjective. But there it is. Notice the caption sits outside of it. I think that's kind of weird. All right, we played with padding. What if, and I'm trying to remember what they call it here. So when you do spacing, you do border spacing or border collapse. So let's try border spacing around the TDs and the TH. So I'm going to do border dash spacing. And once again, we'll do this as a matter of pixels. Maybe 10 pixels is kind of good here too. Did that do anything? You might not see the difference, and here's how you see the difference. Watch both of these tables as I cut this. Did you guys notice the change? I'm going to guess that you're not noticing it at all.
Light, barely.
Yeah, and I'm trying to make sure here that I'm not messing up my code here, because I think I am. Nope, I'm not. Okay, so CSS. Let's do border dash spacing. I thought I had it in my copy paste buffer, but it kind of went away, so it didn't. Yeah, I'm not seeing that it's having any effect here. I don't know if you guys are catching that or not. What if I add this to the table? Now watch what happens now. There you go. So that increases the space in between all the cells. Right. may or may not be what you want. So with the one table, we're still seeing all the borders on the cell. With the other table, we're not. What you also might want to do is you might want to say, well, this is kind of hard to read on this background. So maybe I should say background dash color on this, and let's do a antique white's a pretty simple one since it's right there. And now you got a little bit more definition to the table, if you will, right? So there's a kind of a background. You can see the content, I think, a little bit more clearly, and you can adjust these things. You can also, if you wish, you can do background images on a cell. You can color each cell separately. You can apply classes to cells and content and whatever. So all of that is conceivable here, but this is just a really primitive example of a table. And a table is useful when you have like lists of information where you're trying to compare stuff, although this is kind of primitive, it kind of gives you that idea of what's possible here. Right, I'm gonna go back to the PowerPoint here and just kind of move along with the presentation. This isn't a very long thing, we're almost done already. But one thing that you sometimes see on a table, and you may or may not see this often, is like if you have like lots of rows and columns of information where it's like more than like a few, let's say like 100 rows of stuff, and you're looking at data and the data's real wide. One trick that they sometimes do is they use this thing called, alternate background colors or striping of a table so you can see each row separately and clearly. In order to make that happen in CSS, they have a special thing that they do, right? And so what they're doing here, and this is the code, so we're attaching this to a TR, but I want you to notice the CSS selector, there's a colon. I'll have you think back to when we did like the hover effect on a link, where we say a:hover, that kind of thing. This is the same kind of thing. It's called a pseudoclass is what it is. And then they have these pseudoclass definitions here, which are kind of bizarre. This is an advanced CSS skill, by the way, so I would not worry about like memorizing any of this stuff, but they're generally called pseudoclasses. And so I can say that the first time I have a TR, the first of type, that style applies only to the first one of that type. Not all of them, just the first one. Pretty weird, right? Or if it's a child, if it's an element that's inside that element, it's the first child element. Kind of hard to describe without seeing it. Or if it's the last one, the first one or the last one can be special. Or you can do nth of type and say like the fifth one, so you can put in the number 5, or the 10th one, only that one's highlighted, right? Or they also allow you to do even and odd, so you can do this declaration. So I'm just copy this entire declaration here if it lets me. It's not. Okay, so looks like I have to type. I thought this was let me see if maybe oh, no, it's not my mouse pointer that's doing it. All right, so this is not text. This is actually an image that they have typed in here, but it's nth of type even is what we're going to try to do here. So I'm going to add that, and this is kind of an interesting effect. So I'm going to put a style on tr colon nth of type, and I'm curious as to why Dreamweaver's not auto-typing this for me. And we say even, so every even numbered one will have this particular style, and all they're doing is a background color. And then let's pick a color that is different. Something kind of light, but not too distracting here. Maybe lavender is a nice color. And then you can see up in the table here now that every other row is colored a different color. If you want, you can also switch that to odd, and you can see that it changes it. I'm not really sure why it left the other one in place that way. So I might actually switch to code view, switch back to live view. Okay, so there it corrected itself. So that's just a way that we do table striping, if you guys are curious. But the technique here, this is a pseudo class. This is actually a pretty advanced CSS technique, but you can use it to control really bizarre stuff. But if you want to stripe your table, that's the technique for doing so, or an easy technique for doing so. Otherwise, if you think about this, if I had 1,000 rows in a table, I would have to go in there and maybe add a class to every other row and say, color this one or something like that. In this case, I just say nth of type even. All the even numbered ones will change without writing separate code for each one or separate HTML. That's really kind of the thinking here. Super powerful command, by the way. All right. Now to finish out the last little bit here, tables can be used in a number of different ways, and they're really kind of a neat way to kind of organize information depending on what you're doing. But it's also possible here that when your table gets complex, that you might want to create sections within your table. So once again, this stretches across 2 pages here, by the way. So we have the table tag, and then you'll notice the regular table row. Here's the table header, table row, and table data, but you'll notice that they're breaking the table into a head section, like a header, a body section, like a body, and a footer section. So like, for example, and here's kind of a thing. So caption, right? A header or a footer, and then all the stuff in between, right? And by being able to put it inside a separate set of tags like tfoot or tbody or thead, I can also apply separate styles to each one of those things in my style sheet to come up with some really cool looks, right? So I can style individual parts of the table that way. And that's the reason mostly why they created it. It also groups things. So you have stuff that like header areas, body areas, and footer areas, all separately stylable and all separately contained within each other, so you can do all sorts of things, including with JavaScript and CSS. How necessary that is for this assignment, I'm going to say it's not necessary. I think that the format that probably is most needed for this assignment, frankly, is just this first, table thing that we did with the table headers, and then just table rows and data cells, and then a little bit of CSS to go with it to make it look a little bit nicer. That's kind of the goal for Chapter 8's assignment and the individual assignment. All right, folks, that covers the whole little talk on tables. Any questions on this as I end the recording?